What if a letter could bring a revolution back to life? In this powerful and emotional video, we uncover a never-before-heard letter from Mariam Sankara, the widow of Africa's most visionary leader, Thomas Sankara, to Captain Ibrahy Trari, the young president of Burkina Faso who dared to resurrect a forgotten legacy. Years after Thomas Sankara's assassination, his name was still whispered in fear, until now, when a statue was raised in his honor. One woman who had been silent for decades decided it was finally time to speak. What she wrote will break your heart and inspire your soul. If you believe in justice, memory, and the power of passing a torch from one generation to the next, this story will stay with you long after the screen fades. The pen trembled in Mariam Sankara's hand, its tip hovering over the empty page like a bird, uncertain of where to land. In her modest home in Ouagadougou, sunlight streamed through lace curtains, casting delicate shadows on the desk. Once sacred, space where Thomas Sankara had written words that moved a nation. On the wall behind her, a faded photo of her husband stared back, beret tilted defiantly, eyes alive with a fire that once promised a different Africa. For 37 years, her voice had, been quiet, too quiet. Grief, like dust, had settled into every corner of her life. They had not only killed her husband, they had tried to erase him. Streets renamed, books burned, speeches silenced. And yet, on a grainy television screen just days ago, she had watched the impossible unfold. A statue of Thomas Sankara unveiled in the heart of the capital. She hadn't gone. She couldn't. Instead, she had watched alone, hand clasped over her mouth as the crowd chanted a name that had once been unspeakable, a name she whispered only in prayer. And now, as if pulled by a force older than sorrow, she sat to write. "Dear Captain Trari," she began. Forgive an old woman her tears. This was not a political gesture. This was not strategy. This was memory woven into ink, love written into legacy, an emotional relay across time, from a widow who had buried her voice to a soldier who had dared to resurrect the silence. The letter was a lifeline, not to bring Thomas back, but to remind the world that he had ever lived. And through that trembling pen, she would remind Captain Ibrahy Trari that leadership isn't just about the living. It's about the legacies you choose to carry. The night Thomas Sankara died, Mariam became a widow. But in the days that followed, she became something worse. Invisible. They came at midnight, rifles flashing under moonlight, shouting accusations meant to bury more than a man. The newspapers called it a tragedy. The regime called it justice. But Mariam knew the truth. It was erasure delivered in gunfire. In the weeks that followed, the world around her shrank. Her neighbors stopped knocking. Her friends stopped speaking. The markets she once strolled through turned hostile. Strangers spat at her feet, whispering that she carried the shame of a man too brave for his time. Her two young sons, Fipe and Auguste, flinched every time a motorcycle passed their door, convinced the gunman had returned. Mariam tried to hold on to sanity in a world where the name Sankara had become poison. They didn't just murder her husband, they scrubbed him from the map. Streets were renamed, his books were seized, burned. Children were told never to speak of him, and if they did, to whisper. The revolution that had once given Burkina Faso, its spine had been folded and stored away like an old flag no one wanted to wave. She lived in shadows, a ghost in her own country, but ghosts, she learned, can still feel, can still wait. And 37 years later, when she saw the statue raised in Thomas's honor, she did not weep for what had been lost. She wept because, for the first time in decades, someone had dared to remember, not just privately but loudly, not with a whisper, but with bronze. And suddenly, a name that had once been feared to utter was chanted in streets, painted on walls, echoed through schoolyards. Thomas Sankara, no longer a ghost but a presence reborn. Before the revolution became a headline, it was a conversation. They met in 1983 during the worst drought in decades. Mariam was a young teacher in a cracked schoolhouse outside Ouagadougou, rationing chalk and hope in equal measure. One afternoon, as the red earth cracked underfoot, a battered Renault roared up to the classroom. Dust followed, then boots, then a man with fire in his eyes, Thomas Sankara. He interrupted her lesson, mid-sentence. She was furious. "You cannot storm into a school like it's a battlefield," she told him. He smiled, wide and disarming. "Education," he replied, "is the only battle worth interrupting." He asked her students what they dreamed of. "A full belly," one girl whispered. "A tractor," a boy with missing front teeth said. Then he turned to her. "And you, madame? What do you dream of?" She looked at the crumbling blackboard, the rusted roof, the barefoot children. A country where these children don't have to dream of food. 3 weeks later, he proposed. Their wedding was quieter than a secret. No gown, no feast, just millet, porridge, a ring, and a vow whispered over firelight, to fight side by side. And they did. Thomas renamed Upper Volta to Burkina Faso, land of the upright people. He auctioned off government limousines, vaccinated millions, and handed Mariam the microphone at rallies. "The revolution needs women," he told her, "not as ornaments, as voices." At night they drank bitter tea on their porch and argued about Marx, about Mozart, about whether mangoes were truly the king of fruits. Their sons fell asleep to the sound of debate and dreams, but revolutions don't stay simple for long, and love born in fire must learn to survive the smoke. October 15, 1987, began like any other day. Thomas had just returned from meeting with cotton farmers, his clothes dusty, his energy high. He kissed his sons, Fipe and August, on the forehead, promised them a fishing trip, and told Mariam they would finish the irrigation project together the following week. He squeezed her hand. She remembers that now. She also remembers the shouting. It started at midnight. 12 men, their faces masked, their weapons gleaming like jagged questions in the moonlight. Cries of "traitor" and "down with the puppet" tore through the night like thunder. Mariam moved on instinct, pulling her boys into a closet, pressing herself against the door, heart hammering against the wood. Then came the gunfire. The noise was unbearable. And then, worse, the silence that followed. When she emerged, her home was riddled with bullet holes. Her husband's body lay twisted in the courtyard, riddled with wounds. No dignity, no ceremony, just blood and stillness. The newspapers would call it a political shift. Others called it a coup. But to Mariam, it was a betrayal written in lead. The man who once dared a continent to rise was felled not by foreign invaders, but by hands he once fed. Her sons never truly spoke of that night again. But they never forgot. Motorcycles made them flinch, firecrackers made them cry. They learned young what it meant to lose not just a father, but a future. And Mariam, she buried more than a body. She buried the nation they dreamed of building. She buried the laughter on their porch, the debates over mangoes and Marx, the revolution they once whispered into firelight. History tried to erase him, but grief, she learned, has memory. And though the world turned its back, she remembered, not out of bitterness, but because memory is resistance, and remembering him, that was her quiet rebellion. Mariam visited the statue at dawn. She didn't want crowds. She didn't need applause. She walked alone through the waking streets of Ouagadougou, her scarf pulled tightly over her head, as if trying to shield memory from the morning light. The statue stood tall in the city center, cast in bronze, chin lifted as if still daring the world to dream bigger. The sculptor had captured everything, the calluses on his palms, the crease in his brow, the quiet defiance in his gaze. Mariam reached out and touched the cold metal. For a fleeting second, it felt like touching him again. She thought the moment would be private. But before she could turn to leave, a group of schoolchildren arrived. One boy, no older than 10, asked if she knew the president who fought for the poor. "Yes," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I knew him well." The boy hugged her. Later that week, she brought her grandchildren to the statue. Amina, August's daughter, traced the engraved name with her fingers. Thomas Sankara, President of the Poor. She turned and said, "Grandma, I want to be like him." And something shifted in Mariam, something she hadn't felt in 37 years. Hope. She saw the millet bundles left by village women, saw teachers leading students to recite speeches, saw old soldiers salute and whisper, "We're still here, brother." This statue was more than metal. It was a seed, and Captain Trari had planted it in fertile ground. But she had to be honest. She had to warn him. "The snakes that killed my husband still slither," she wrote. "They wear suits now, not uniforms. They whisper in embassies and boardrooms. They will call you foolish for honoring a ghost. But ghosts, Captain, speak loudest when the people are ready to listen." Her letter was not a eulogy. It was a torch being passed from one era to the next. 3 days after the letter was sent, Captain Ibrahy Trari returned to the statue. It was late. Long after the speeches had ended. Long after the cameras had been packed away. He stood alone beneath the moonlight, letter clutched in his hand. The city humming gently around him. A street vendor fried plantains nearby. Teenagers argued politics under a neon sign. A mother rocked her baby while humming a lullaby. Life continued. But for him, time paused. He reread Mariam's words, eyes tracing the places where ink had blurred from her tears. He thought of his own mother, of her cracked hands, of the peanuts she sold so he could go to school. She had died the same year he joined the army. Her last words had been, "Make them see us." He hadn't understood what she meant, but now, standing before Thomas Sankara's bronze gaze, he did. That night, in the small concrete office where Sankara had once drafted revolutions, Captain Trari wrote his reply on military stationery. "Madame, Sankara, your letter crossed the desert and found me. I am no Thomas Sankara. I do not have his brilliance or his bravery. I am just a soldier who grew up hearing tales of the man who gave his salary to orphans. But your words are a map. I will follow them. Not to build monuments, but to finish what he started." He listed promises. The irrigation project had already broken ground. Schools for girls would be roofed before the rainy season. Clinics would open where none existed. "You asked me to protect his memory," he wrote. "I will do better. I will make his memory unnecessary." The next morning, as workers repaved a pothole near the statue, a young girl named Fatima stopped to watch. She sold phone credit to tourists, but in her backpack was a tattered copy of Thomas Sankara Speaks, bought from a street vendor for 500 CFA francs. She didn't know it yet, but one day she would design Burkina Faso's first solar-powered hospital. Above her, the statue's bronze fist pointed toward the horizon. Somewhere in Ouagadougou, Mariam Sankara smiled. Some stories end with silence, but this one ends with a spark. Mariam Sankara lit a candle with her letter, not just in memory of her husband, but in the hope that someone would carry the flame. Captain Ibrahy Trari didn't just answer, he acted. And a new generation, led by girls like Fatima, inspired by voices once buried, has already picked up where Sankara left off. The world tried to erase a hero, but what they forgot is that you can bury a man, but not a movement. And when justice takes root in the soil of sacrifice, it doesn't just grow back. It grows stronger. So if this story moved you, share it. Say his name. Remember her words, because memory is a revolution. And Mariam's letter? It wasn't goodbye. It was the beginning.